right, welcome back into Carps Corner. Another unbelievable week of college football in the books, and there was some zigs, some zags, some turns, a lot of crazy things happened that some people foresaw. Got a couple things really right, got a couple things really wrong, and with that, there's a little bit of a reckoning, but this is the kind of chaos that what makes college football fantastic. You look across the nation, all kinds of disruptions with each and every conference. I'll tell you some of the things that we know. There are 5 big games, I think, that impacted the college football landscape, like on a massive level. Not a massive level for most. A couple, I think, just to really define some things and clean it up for us, because at this point in the college football season, there's a lot of things that have happened that we don't truly know why some of these teams are playing the way they are. They've been bipolar all over the place. Things have kind of been flipped on their head. And so we'll get into 5 big games that really kind of defined and outlined probably what we're going to see moving forward with the college football season and why some of the rankings are the way they are. And so I guess you can start. The first game, and I'll lump these 2 games together. They're going to be 1A and 1B. I got both of these very, very wrong. I thought that there was a little bit of uncertainty in the SEC. I thought it was maybe an opportunity for Alabama to be challenged by Ole Miss. I love Lane Kiffin coming out with "get your popcorn ready" and all this stuff like that. I thought that was the swagger that you really needed to be able to take on Nick Saban. Matt Corral, I thought they had the offense, thought the defense would be good enough, and this looked like it would be some sort of point race. Maybe first to 60, 63 potentially wins it. And that was all based upon what we saw last year. Well, unfortunately, one of the things that we realized in this key first year that's kind of a post-COVID-ish year, where a lot of things that happened last year have no bearing on what's happening this season. You have to kind of wash and throw a lot of that away. And so I thought Lane Kiffin, knowing Nick Saban, understanding, how he's kind of built, playing in to, Lane's own like arrogance, making the popcorn comment before. Yeah, it was get your popcorn ready. It was get your popcorn ready for the Alabama Crimson Tide fan, because they boat raced them early. It was never really a game. It ends up looking a little bit closer later, but 28-0, in the first half. I mean, come on now. Like, you can tell me it's 42-21 all you want. I mean, Bama was thoroughly in control of that game and really dominated it from start to finish. Bryce Young was good, but it's really the story of Bama being able to run the ball. And in this era now where we just keep talking about pushing the ball down the field and everybody wants to throw it, some of these teams that are near the top of the heap in college football, their passing offenses haven't been great. Now, Bama's is good, but they got it done against Ole Miss running the ball, and Brian Robinson just pounding the football 36 times. Nick Saban looking a lot like he did, 5, 6, 7 years ago, when he's handing the ball off and just managing the game with his quarterback. But 36 times, $171, 4 TDs, getting it done. Brian Robinson, tip of the cap to you for a fantastic job of being able to go out there and play some football at a really high level and help escort your team to the win. Now, part and parcel with that, the other big game in the SEC, Sam Pittman and Arkansas, taking on Georgia, and you thought, okay, this looked like an opportunity here, Georgia, between the hedges. Like, Georgia can't throw the ball. They really didn't throw the ball that well in this game. You saw in warmups, JT Daniels, like, he's wincing in pain. Like, he didn't have the face of a guy who looked confident, ready to go out there and play. And, because of that, you see Stetson Bennett. I mean, he's a member of the all-name team, but I don't know if he's the guy that you want quarterbacking your squad if you're contending for a national championship. And so you pass it for 72 yards. I mean, I'm not sure what year this is where you can win games against a top 10 team like Arkansas. But when your defense plays as good as Georgia's does, it's going to give you a lot of leeway, and they can line up and pound the football. And so we'll see if, the receiving core begins to get healthy, if JT Daniels begins to get healthy, if that'll help Georgia and help put them on the track of success. I don't think they can beat Bama playing this way, but there are other examples around college football this year where there are teams that have terrific defenses. They turn the football over. They're able to run the football and pound it. And it's kind of an old school mentality, kind of an old school process that they were able to do that. So those are the 2 games, 1A, 1B, because what they did was they told me that Bama and Georgia are elite. Now, Georgia still has that flaw of not being able to run the football, but I think it's clear cut right now based upon how those two teams have played to this point. They're the best two teams in college football. They're the class right now of college football. Until I see differently, I'm going to continue to tip my cap and pay deference to them with that. Now, Georgia, for me to continue to say that, I'm going to have to see growth and improvement in the run game or in the pass game, because they can run the ball, they can play defense. You're not going to be able to beat Bama doing just that. And there are some other teams where you might struggle if you can't eventually put the ball in the air. Now, the second biggest game, remember I lumped those first two together, 1A and 1B. Second biggest game is, I'm going to say, Cincinnati traveling to South Bend. Cincinnati, after the opening drive, in which Notre Dame marched down the field, it's capped with a Jack Cohn interception to Ahmad Sauce Gardner. Because I think people are like, okay, here's Notre Dame. They're moving down the field. They're getting some things going. They score on this first drive, take the lead, and you know what? They might never look back. But Cincinnati rises up, forces a turnover, one of a couple of interceptions that they're able to force on the day, get the ball back. And from that point on, they really controlled the game. Now, Notre Dame has a pretty good defense. They were able to slow Cincy's running game. I think Cincinnati's offensive line really dominated this game, came to play and play really well. Desmond Ridder played really well. The Cincinnati receivers proved that they can win on the outside. And I think you tip your cap to Coach Fickell, Luke Fickell. And, he was widely acknowledged as, one of the, hot, trendy up and comers. I mean, the guy's getting close to 50. So I don't know if he's, one of these hot, young, new coaches anymore. I mean, he's pretty established. He just looks pretty young and he's in good shape. So I guess he's got that going for him. But Cincinnati really dominated this football game. It could have very easily been 31-7 if they, convert some field goals, if they don't have some turnover on downs, if they're able to potentially pick some stuff up. Some bad penalties. That's Cincinnati. Their two Achilles heels are that they have some bad penalties, some pre-snap stuff they've got to get cleaned up, and their offensive line isn't great. Now, they did some things to try to protect him against Notre Dame and, get some protection wise and to move some things around, but they like to get their tight ends out because they're athletic. They would try to get the running backs involved in the pass game, and Desmond Ritter's kind of bailed him out because he's such a dynamic athlete. And so when he gets on the edge, that giant stride just gobbles up yards. And so you have to be a little bit weary about when you choose to bring pressure and how it looks. But those are Cincinnati's two Achilles heels. I think Notre Dame's still a really good team. I don't think they're in that great category, but I think they're really solid. If Brian Kelly will roll with Drew Pine, who you saw last week against Wisconsin, played well. He came in, gave him a burst of energy. He can kind of throw it pretty well, but he also runs it very well. And so he's kind of a blend of the best of both worlds of what they can get at quarterback. And Drew Brees said during the broadcast, he's a member of the 6 foot and under club. So he's a fan of his. But I do think that he's kind of their answer, because this Notre Dame offense, I don't know if they can really run the ball dynamically without him, but he adds that added element in the running game to help bolster it and give it the extra juice that it needs. But Notre Dame's schedule isn't very difficult moving forward. USC is looking very, very average. The one team I think that could be rising up is Stanford. They look like a team that could be better, but Virginia, the North Carolina, like a lot of the ACC schools they played haven't been great. And I think, the ACC with Boston College going down, I think that they've all but eliminated themselves. And maybe that even happened with Clemson's second loss from the college football playoff. Just kind of how their conference has fared at large, because the jerseys matter. You need your big dogs to be undefeated to feel like there's the cachet to vote them into the top 10. Right now, that's just not happening. Not happening in the ACC. Another big game that told us a lot. Wisconsin, they lost to Penn State to open the season. They lost to Notre Dame. They hadn't been able to really finish drives. They've been running the football inconsistently. They've got a championship caliber defense, but they've been asking them to do too much. Thought, okay, this is a team in Michigan who really just runs the football. If that's the case, maybe they can load up. You can stop them. Wisconsin's been great against the run. I'll give Jim Harbaugh a little bit of credit here, man. He dialed it up when he needed to. Put some in Cade McNamara's hands. He had a nice shot call and a flea flicker to help kind of break the game open a little bit. Michigan was able to run the football. They looked pretty good doing it. Their defense stepped up and played. And Wisconsin, like they just got nothing. Once Graham Mertz was knocked out of the game, they were even worse than they were before. But this is going to be a rebuilding year for the Badgers. And it's unfortunate because their defense is pretty good. They just don't have the offense right now or the running game to kind of be able to match up and to play as good as they need to play. So that's kind of the story there. But that keeping Michigan undefeated, it slides them up higher now into the top 10. And we'll get into where the Big Ten's ranked in some of those schools and what that I think means for college football here a little bit in a minute. But that was a huge game for Michigan. It preserved them being 5-0. They still can't really throw the ball, and they're going to have to do it. They're working McCarthy in a little bit at quarterback. He's got some juice in his legs. He can provide an added running threat. I think Jim Harbaugh's looking down the line and thinking, okay, we're going to have a hard time beating teams with dynamic offenses who can actually throw the ball and have some success. We're not going to be able to do that just lining up and running it. We can't run for 300 yards on everybody, and we can't just rely on, getting turnovers and having short fields. We're going to have to find a way to throw it. And then even with that, we're going to have to find a way to try to make sure that we're able to create some of those mismatches in the run game. And a lot of that can happen with having a versatile and mobile quarterback. The fourth biggest game that was most impactful, I think, happened on Friday night. I was wondering how good Iowa was. I know they beat Iowa State, and I think Iowa State's okay. I mean, they're a pretty good Big 12 team, but I think that they may have been a little overrated to start the season. They beat an Indiana team. I think that proved to be overrated. You're trying to figure out, and this is the thing with kind of similar to Georgia. Iowa is Georgia light, in my opinion. They just don't have, quite the caliber of recruits that Georgia brings in, but they run the football really well. They have a great defense. They can force turnovers, and they throw it. They've thrown it better than Georgia, but I wouldn't, look at this Iowa passing attack, to study and to take notes on. I mean, they're functional, but they're not, I would say, highly efficient or highly productive. And so as I watched that game and I sat there, and Petrus has been good. Their defense was phenomenal. They forced Tagovailoa into 5 interceptions. I mean, they're giving the ball up. I mean, it was unfortunate. The kickoff return injury early, drops the ball, ends up converting it into a touchdown, shortly after that. And it was kind of off to the races. But the question was, could Iowa slow down a team with elite athletes on the outside? Would they be exposed a little bit defensively? And they stepped up. They got pressure on Talea. They did a great job attacking him, forced the ball, high throws, interceptions galore. I mean, they had 6-7 turnovers in the game. It was absolutely ridiculous. Anybody's going to be able to win games when you're doing that. And so their defense came through once again. I guess it's better to be lucky than good. I didn't think that Iowa was going to be able to continue to play this way, where they could rely solely on their defense to go out there and kind of bail them out. Their offense did make plays, and when they're on short fields, it was a lot easier because statistically you looked at it and you thought, okay, Iowa's stats and yardage wise were good, not great, but when you're on short fields all the darn time, it's tough to really rack up a lot of rushing yards. And I think it showed as well that Maryland maybe wasn't quite as good as advertised. And Mike Loxley's done a good job there. They've recruited at a high level, but they still have some work to do, and they're going to have to bolster their offensive and defensive line. That's where they're not quite good enough yet. They've got the perimeter skill, I think. I think Talea is going to be fine at the quarterback position. Heck, he had 10 touchdowns and 1 interception coming in. I mean, those numbers ballooned dramatically after that game. But I think he'll be fine as he moves forward. But that keeps Iowa then at 3. And it kind of pairs them up like Georgia and Georgia light, because they're both teams that just run the ball and play defense, and they do just enough through the passing game for success. And I'm curious to see, is we're going to have a massive battle here this week with Penn State and Iowa, as I believe Penn State travels out to Iowa City. First time, I want to say, to a top 5 matchup in the Big Ten that didn't include Ohio State or Michigan since the 50s. And so you're going to have 3 versus 4 out there, and I'm sure it's going to be a terrific game as well. Now, this brings me to my 5th game, and it's out west. Why does this game matter? Well, Oregon beat Ohio State, and I think people looked at them in the Pac-12 as potentially the road to the playoff. It would run through Eugene. There were some calls at the end of that game that were highly questionable, but at the end of it, the results are really all that matter. And Oregon gets beat. And so now you look at the Pac-12, like who could it potentially be? Could Oregon still potentially get in the playoff? Yeah, I think they can. They're going to need some help. But they're really one loss away from eliminating the Pac-12, which is what Cincinnati kind of needs. Eliminate the Pac-12. They need probably Oklahoma to have a loss at some point as well. I don't know if they would be able to get in over a one-loss Big Ten team just based upon the perception of how good they are right now. And so that's going to be kind of turning and churning. But those Stanford beating Oregon at home, I think Stanford's good. They have a chance to maybe knock off Notre Dame. I just don't know if there's enough national recognition for them right now to be able to slide into that top 5-6 conversation. That's really where the issue becomes. I don't know if the Pac-12 really has that much depth. And, if you're relying on, Stanford to provide it for you behind Oregon, I don't know if they're quite there and quite ready to do that yet. So they're playing good football. They seem to really have it kind of turned around there. It started with the bludgeoning at USC, but Oregon losing was really, really big because it opens up a lot of other pathways, including one potentially for Ohio State, who Oregon beat. And you'll have a tough time arguing against an undefeated versus a one-loss school if the one loss was to the undefeated Power 5 possible conference champions. So those were really the 5 big games that I thought told us a lot about college football. The 2 SEC games that I'm buttoned right together. You had Cincinnati at Notre Dame, and then 2 Big Ten games and a Pac-12 game that kind of outlined, I think, a lot of what we're going to see here throughout the rest of the college football season. Now we get to the rankings. Big Ten, you have 2 at the top, and I'm not going to dismiss that. Bama and Georgia, they've done a lot. They've been the teams that have kind of been steamrolling outside of that opening win to Clemson. I mean, Georgia's been steamrolling everybody, and they've looked really good. And bludgeoned Arkansas, who was a top 10 team, who had been playing really, really well. So they're sitting there at top 2. But outside of that, 5 Big Ten teams ranked in the top 11 in the AP, with starting with Iowa at 3. You've got Penn State at 4, and then OSU at 11. You've got Michigan at 9 and Michigan State at 11, which Michigan State being up there is good for the Big Ten, because that provides you that 4th team in the East, that these teams are going to beat up each other and cannibalize them a little bit. And it gives you that backstop to where, hey, there's 3-4 teams in this side of the division that are really good. You've got Iowa out in the West. If they can be as undefeated or one-loss team coming in, they'll most likely be ranked, still in the top 10 or possibly in the top 5, depending on how their schedule shakes out and who their loss potentially would be to. But there's a lot there in the Big Ten. And this is the first time that this has been the case in a number of years. And so I think the SEC has the cream at the very top. The rest of the girth of that goes to the Big Ten, and a lot of that in the Big Ten East with all of those schools. So you're going to start to see, some big matchups, Michigan State, who play the same day as Penn State and Ohio State towards the end of the month. And hopefully these teams keep taking care of business, and you get to see these massive, massive games if you're a fan of Big Ten football, because there was a time where it looked a lot more like this than it did for probably the past 5 years. And it starts because all those teams took care of their business in the non-conference, and they've beaten the teams within the conference that they were supposed to beat. And then you have Cincinnati, who's lurking at number 5. I think that's very important as well, because this is the AP, and Cincinnati's climbed back up in there. They're sitting right behind Penn State and Iowa. One of those teams is going to have to lose this weekend. You would imagine if Cincinnati takes care of business and they have to keep winning impressively, they can't afford to be squeaking through games. They have to look good. If they can look good and handle all their business doing that, I think Cincinnati then will be sliding that 4th spot. And I am so anxious and eager to see how these college playoff rankings, what they look like. Should everything kind of remain status quo through the next couple of weeks, that when they come out, where Cincinnati's going to be ranked, where some of these Big Ten schools are going to be ranked, where's Oregon ranked, where does Notre Dame go? Who outside of the SEC, do they jump Kentucky up, who had a huge win against Florida? I just don't think Kentucky can challenge Georgia, so I'm not putting them in that category of a huge game. They told me a lot about Kentucky and what Mark Stoops is doing, but just for the whole college football landscape, I don't think it really tells us a ton, because I don't know if anybody can challenge Georgia then in the East. And I really don't know if now anyone can challenge Alabama in the West based upon what I saw with Ole Miss, what I've seen with A&M, and then, what we just saw with Arkansas taking on Georgia. So that kind of rounds that out. And lastly, just want to finish off on this, with Tom Brady. going back to New England, it's incredibly difficult to go back to a place that you play, that you were drafted. And I spent 4 years in Dallas. Going back there and playing with Detroit, you know, the emotions and everything that goes into it, playing friends on the other side, people in the front office, the support staff, the city, running out of another tunnel that you used to just watch teams run out of, you know, 8, 9, 10 times, 11 times a year. And being on that side, it's incredibly difficult. You know, Tom didn't throw a touchdown pass in the game on Sunday night. Played, I thought, pretty good football in a driving rainstorm up in New England. But what was really most impressive is this is what you see from elite competitors. His ability to really take his emotions, which were there. It's not like he's emotionless, and control them and be able to cut through them and still go out and execute. And on the flip side of that, Bill Belichick as well. We know we look at him as an old curmudgeon-y guy who doesn't care about anything. I'm going to tell you this. Looking at Tom Brady on that other sideline, it's one thing to do it when you're watching film and to watch him and see these things. It's another thing to do it when he comes back up there. And that's why I love the fact, you know, he gives the ice cold hand, hug, and everybody just, hey, look at this guy. He still doesn't care. But it's reported, you have Albert Breer, Adam Schefter, all the guys, like, goes into the Buccaneers locker room after the game, grabs Tom, and they go and talk for 20 minutes. Like that to me is what sports is all about. Guys who are competitors like now, but have been competing on the same side for so long, that have an unbelievable working and professional relationship. One that's its success is unprecedented. And Tom's 21, 20 years in the league. He's played in 10 Super Bowls and won 7 of them. He's won a third and played at almost half of all the Super Bowls since he's been in the league. And almost all that happened with Bill Belichick. And so they understand that. They know there's a synergy there between them. And it was great to see them kind of talk that thing out. And both of the guys, and especially Tom, saying the stuff that you see that we talk about in the media, that's never been accurate and it's never been right. And so I just want to touch on that because Tom's such a great guy. And I know he's easy to hate because he's good looking. He's got a good looking wife. He's super successful. He's one hell of a nice guy. And he's one heck of a competitor. And standing up and watching the entirety of that game last night, man, it lived up to its billing. And it was great to see because it's great for the sport of football. So I wanted to wrap everything up there by touching on one guy who I really respect, and 2 guys, really, Bill Belichick and Tom Brady, and how it should be handled. And so they do it the right way, as everyone should. Thanks.